The title of this video might sound a little like braggy, but I'm really not trying to brag. I'm very much not a professional author, and this definitely isn't a get-rich-quick scheme. If anything, it's a way to not make a lot of money. It's just that I have written books, and sometimes people ask me about them, they ask for tips and stuff like that, so I kind of wanted to make a video about how I managed to write 3 books and how it worked for me, and maybe some of that advice will work for you as well if you're trying to write your first book or you're in the middle of writing your first book. So basically, at my high school, we had to do a senior project. Like, we had to do one project that spanned the course of the whole year, and I think took more than like 60 hours or something like that. And for a while, I had wanted to write a book, and I just didn't really have the motivation to. Like, I was a very busy person. I was working and playing sports and like attempting to have a social life, so I had like no free time. But if I was gonna dedicate all of these hours to making something for my senior project, I figured it might as well be a book. I had written one kind of story before that I had intended to turn into a book. Like, it had been a few chapters, and it was much darker than the thing I originally ended up writing, but I took some of like the locations and characters and used them in the start of my first book. And aside from that, I had just kept like a note app in my phone and written down a bunch of like character names or things I wanted to happen in a story. So when I actually went down to start brainstorming my book, I had all of these like bits and pieces thrown together from the past, I don't know, year or 2 years. And I was able to kind of start like fitting it all together. For me, I wanted to know exactly where the book was going to end before I started it. I don't really see how people can start writing a book without knowing where it's going to end, because you want there to be like twists that take the reader by surprise, and if they're also taking you by surprise, I feel like there wasn't enough foreshadowing or enough like planning of it going on behind the scenes. There are some authors who can do that and do it very well. I am not one of those authors. And I wanted to write a trilogy because it felt like everything was coming out in trilogies. So I tried to plan out like a 3-book arc with kind of like a vague ending for the 3rd book, and then I kind of had a vague idea of how I wanted the 2nd book and the 1st book to end. And then I started thinking about what obstacles could get in my character's way before the finish that I have intended for the 1st book. So I just brainstormed a lot of ideas of what could go wrong and how they would try to get there and how they would get stopped. And eventually, I didn't really know exactly what was going to happen when, but I had a bunch of ideas for like, this person stops them here, this thing is a conflict here, and I had all these pieces basically. And then I just started writing, and I had my end goal in mind, so I was kind of planning to have certain things happen at certain times, but I kept the other things that I'd been like planning and just kind of let them happen as they happened. And if like a piece that I had wanted in the book just like never made it in, that was okay. And sometimes something happened and I decided to go in a totally different direction, and that was all right. Basically, I like started off with this outline and kind of went like this. Like, I followed it, but a lot of stuff changed along the way. And the actual writing process for me when I was writing this in my senior year of high school was basically, I was writing when I had the time, which was at night. Depending on what time of the school year it was, I would either have some combination of soccer or Starbucks and school that would keep me busy for the whole day, and I wouldn't get back until like 10 or 11 or something. So there were a lot of nights where I would get home and I would write until like 2 a.m. or something, and then I would wake up at 6 for high school the next day, which, you know, like, isn't a great long-term strategy, but it's all I had. So a lot of my like Friday and Saturday nights were just alone in my room writing, and that's a large chunk of how I got my first book done. I think it also helped that I had a very strict deadline, like with my school. Like, I had to turn in my first draft by a certain date, so I knew at what times I had to be hitting certain chapters, and I had like a layout of where I wanted to be, and if I wasn't getting there on time, I would schedule time for myself to write. So I would actually like in my calendar put like, I am writing on Sunday from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. and I wouldn't do other things. I would like not watch TV, I would tell friends I couldn't hang out, I would tell my parents that like I had to be working on this. It actually required like legitimate scheduling for me. But then I turned in my first draft of my book and I like presented about it at school, and then my plan was to edit it and self-publish it that summer. But after I started looking through it and deciding what edits I wanted to make, I wanted to make a pretty big revision. So like initially I had like a prophecy in my book, and it was like the driving factor for everything. Like, the kids knew of this prophecy and that they had to fulfill it, and so they were like constantly trying to do the next thing to fulfill it. And that was like their motivation for the whole thing. And I didn't like it as their motivation. It felt cliched, and it just felt like too easy. So I took it out. completely. I just like Control F, went through everywhere I mentioned the prophecy, marked it, and then on my next read through, I tried to take out all the sentences about it, and I tried to give them motivations that were separate from that were more individual for them and their personalities. Like the shy main character was more like not wanting to do stuff, and his like best friend, more outgoing character, like was wanting to do more stuff, and so their motivations were more like based on their personalities instead of just some random prophecy. And I think that's one of the important things to keep in mind with characters is their motivation. Like not only the motivation of your main character, but the motivation of all of the side characters, of their parents, of their friends, of the people they run into. Everyone is doing something for some reason, completely independent of your main story. Like all the characters aren't living around this story. They're just living in their world, trying to live their life and doing things like for a reason. So you need to be aware of everyone's reasons for doing things and have them act accordingly. I think that was one of my main problems at first, was that I was like, everyone in this universe exists for my story. And they don't. They're doing their own things. Like, if you want it to seem and feel realistic and good. So I took out the prophecy and I rewrote a bunch of parts and I edited a lot of parts and I read it through again and again and again. I read that book so many times. And this whole time I didn't have a name for my book. I had no idea what to call it. I eventually went with Through the Portal, and I decided to make that the name of the series as well. And then I decided to self-publish my book. I spent a lot of time researching if I wanted to be like querying agents and stuff to try to find a real publisher, or if I just wanted to self-publish my book. At the time, I think it was like the very beginning of self-publishing, and there was a lot of hype around it because some people had like written really good stuff through self-publishing and gotten really famous and had a lot of sales. And there was a blog by J.A. Conrath, which I'll link to below if it's still around. I haven't checked it out in a few years, but it had a lot of really good information on it that I found really useful to making my decision about if I wanted to pursue real publishing or self-publishing. And I think the publishing industry as a whole is dying or has to change drastically to adapt to how we read and distribute books nowadays. Like, it makes no sense to charge someone the same for a paperback as you would an ebook, because you don't have all the physical costs of making a book and shipping it when you're buying an ebook. And yet publishers have tried to keep their prices like artificially really high, even for ebooks, and that's just, it's wrong. Like, I feel like if we can make books cheaper and more accessible, we absolutely should. But maybe that's not the route you want to go. Maybe you want to have like a real publisher, in which case you just got to send a million emails to agents and stuff. And there's a lot of resources online to help you do that, but I don't really know the process for that. I originally uploaded my book to Smashwords and Amazon and Barnes & Noble. Smashwords originally distributed my book to like several retailers. It was available on Smashwords. It was also distributed to Sony and Apple. Amazon obviously went to the Amazon ebook store, which was accessible by Kindles, and Barnes & Noble had their Nook. For finding a cover for my first book, I think I just Googled like self-published covers, and there was someone who like freelance made covers for self-published authors for maybe like 80 bucks or something. So I paid someone and they made a cover. It was like a moon with a dragon in front of it because there's a dragon in the story. And yeah, I thought it was pretty cool. In retrospect, it was maybe pretty basic. I then spent a lot of time emailing different book blogs, asking them to review my book. I definitely sent like hundreds of emails just being like, hey, could you add this to your to-read list and maybe review it at some point? Thanks. And most of the time I didn't get a response. Sometimes I got a response saying they just had too many books. And a few times I got responses saying, yeah, it looks good, I'll read it at some point. So not a lot happened immediately. I don't think I was getting any sales on my book, maybe like one a month or something. And I think initially I had listed it for like $3 maybe, because Amazon wants you to price things in between like $3 and $10. And then I went to my first year in college and I started writing the second book. And I think once I already was like so invested in this story, it was way easier to write the second book because I knew where I wanted to go and I felt like I had a deadline because I had already written this first one, and like I expected myself to have another one after that. Like I couldn't just leave it unfinished. So the same thing kind of happened. In any of my free time, I would just go and write. And I took the same kind of vague outline idea, made some areas where I thought this should happen, this should happen, this should happen, and like kind of followed. And about 1 year later, I had a second book. And for this one, I asked one of my friends to like paint a phoenix for me because she was a really good painter and there was a phoenix in the book. So she did this amazing painting of a phoenix, and I just kind of made like the text and my name and made a cover for that. And I thought it looked really cool just because I was impressed by how amazing the phoenix was. But like the font and everything, also pretty basic. And then basically the same thing happened for my third book. Spent all of my second year of college writing it. I had a different friend this time make like a digital drawing of the third beast in my book, which was called a Raitori, and it was like an electric bird thing to go with the, you know, dragon phoenix thing. And again, I was super impressed by what he made, but the cover that I made out of it was pretty like meh. So at some point in there, one of the book blogs that I'd emailed in the beginning eventually got around to reviewing my book, and gave it like a pretty good review. And so I had like an influx of downloads all of a sudden. And I don't remember when that was, but it might have been when I'd already had 3 books out, or maybe when my first 2 were out. And after that, it just kind of like maintained. Like, I guess my book kept getting recommended because of that like large chunk of sales I'd had from the book review. And I was selling like completely through Amazon. Like, I had almost no sales on Smashwords or Barnes & Noble or anything like that. And Amazon, if your book is between $3 and $10, they give you 70% of the royalties. And if it's outside of that, they give you 30%. So you get like pretty good royalties from Amazon, much more than you would get from a traditional publisher. And so I just felt kind of honored to be making like any kind of money off of my books, and I was super happy about it. But once I had all 3 books out, I decided to make the first one free, because then people could try it, and if they liked it, they could go ahead and buy the next 2. But it wasn't really doing me a lot of good to be charging like $3 for my first book. And once I made that free, it just kind of like spiked in downloads, because it went into the free section of the Kindle store and people could just download it a bunch, and that helped sales of my other 2 books. And so I think after that, things went up. And there are also some services that you can sign up for that you pay them like 50 or 100 bucks or whatever, and they send your book out as a part of a newsletter to other people who signed up to hear about books in a certain genre. And I tried a few of those and had like moderate success with them. Like, they helped my downloads kind of temporarily, but it didn't really sustain anything in the long run. And at some point I decided I wanted to redo the covers to make them look more professional and more like coherent. So I had my friend who designed the Raitori for the 3rd book. I had him design like outlines of all of the dragon, the phoenix, the Raitori. And then I like photoshopped that in by making like a rocky background and like having them look like cut out in it. And I found a cool like free font that I could use that looked all destroyed. And I really liked those covers, and those are the covers I still have right now. So all of the books were finished by like 2013. I think I redid all of the covers by like 2014 maybe. And since then, I haven't really done a lot with them. I haven't been trying to promote them. I haven't been reaching out to book blogs. I haven't been sending them out in newsletters. I've just kind of left them there. And since then, sales have just been going like down and down and down, and that's okay. Like, I don't know what else I would expect when I'm paying like literally 0 attention to them. And in retrospect, I don't know if they were the best things I've ever written. I still kind of liked the plot. Like, I'm still interested by the whole plot that I came up with, and I like the direction it went in. But I think I did fall for a lot of kind of tropes and just things that are recreated over and over again in the media that I just kind of like thought this is how a book has to be. And so I made books like that. And I think whatever I write next, I want to be much more different, much more like breaking of tropes, and much more, you know, unique. I guess I never really told you what the books were about. So basically there's like 2 kids, Jem and Oliver, and they're living in like the suburbs of Seattle, and they like fall through a portal into another world, and they get there and there's like magic and stuff. So they basically go traveling through this new world called Callisto, and they visit all of these like new regions that are each like really unique. And they basically try to fight the like evil regime that has outlawed magic. And over the course of the 3 books, it gets more like complex and intense than that, but that's basically like the setup for the first book. And so after that, I wrote a collection of short stories for my senior project in college, which I haven't published, and I think needs a lot more work, but I really like the idea of it, and I just need to run it by some more people. But I haven't touched it in like a year since I graduated, so I don't know when that will actually happen. And before that, in like my junior year of college, I wrote a whole nother book, like completely disconnected from the Through the Portal thing. And I think it's much more the kind of stuff that I want to be writing, but it needs some very serious edits that I just haven't done in like 2 years. So I also don't know when that will ever be a thing, because writing in general has just kind of like stopped being a priority for me. Like, it used to be the thing that I filled all of my free time with, and now YouTube is basically the thing I fill all of my free time with. So I just don't know when that's gonna happen. But yeah, so I don't know if any of that was helpful to you. That was my experience writing books. Hopefully some of it can help you out in some way if you're trying to write something. If you have any questions about writing or editing or self-publishing or anything like that, let me know down in the comments and I'll try to help you out. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. I love you all, and I'll see you next time. Bye!